Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts football podcast, where we discuss the latest news, rumors, and games of the NFL and college football. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah, and we are back again with another action-packed show for you guys to begin the work week. Well, I'm going at the end of the show. I'm going to do a little bit of a Oscar recap because we got OJ, Made in America, the documentary that was on ESPN, which is really great. I thought it was really great. Won an award for best documentary, and I will talk about that at the end of the show. And I'm going to talk about Adrian Peterson as well. I feel like we've been talking about Adrian Peterson a lot, but with the new league year to begin very soon, I feel like it's wise to talk about him since he might hit the free agent market. But first, I want to get started on talking about one of the top free agents in this year's free agent class, so to speak. Alshon Jeffery, the Chicago Bears wideout. Well, it looks like he looks like he's not going to be in the Bears uniform next season. Well, because the Chicago Bears are unlikely to use the franchise tag on Alshon Jeffery, which was confirmed to ESPN. So there is a strong sense that Jeffery is going to test the free agent market, and he will be able to sign with another team once the free agent period begins on March 9th. So this Wednesday, at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, that is the deadline for teams to designate players for the franchise tag. And Jeffery looks like he would not be one of them. Jeffery, he's been one of the top receivers in the game. But, last year he wasn't, his numbers didn't pop out as you would expect. Well, maybe that's because of the quarterbacks he's played with. Maybe it's because of the offense he's played with. But he only caught 52 balls for 821 yards and 2 touchdowns in 12 games. And remember, he missed 4 games. He served a suspension for violating the league's policy on performance-enhancing substances. So he played with 3 quarterbacks: Jay Cutler, Brian Hoyer, Matt Barkley. Brian Hoyer and Matt Barkley have pretty solid seasons. But when you look at his numbers from last season compared to the last two, from 2013 to 2014, Jeffery has been really one of the best in the league. Well, if I look at his numbers here, his last 2 years, they were not very good. He barely had 54. His highest in the last 2 years was 54 receptions. He had 52 this year. And ever since 2013, 2014, he kind of fell off. I would agree that he did have his 2 best years in 2013, 2014. And his last 2 seasons were not up to par with those years, but I still think he has a lot of talent left. He's 27. I do think he is about to be in the prime of his career, or if he's not already. But the thing is, though, he tried to stay. He hasn't been healthy in 2015. And 2016, he missed games because of a suspension. So 2013, 2014, that was the most successful years that we've seen from Jeffery. And those years combined, we had 174 receptions, 2,554 yards, and 17 touchdowns, all combined in those 2 years. So he missed games to injury in 2015, and then, of course, he had that suspension. So I just want to say, what does this do for teams that need a receiver? I do think the Eagles are going to make a strong play for him. I do think maybe perhaps the Rams can make a play for him. I do think he's going to have a lot of interest, which he should. Jeffery has size. He has a skill set that will get him red zone targets. So I don't see him coming back to the Bears at all, and I did expect that to not happen. I do think that Jeffery needs to move on, and despite if the Bears get a quarterback or not, like Jimmy Garoppolo, I don't see Alshon Jeffery in a uniform for the Bears. I think the Rams, I do think the Eagles, maybe the Tennessee Titans will be teams that will be really good destinations for Jeffery. But yeah, I do think Jeffery needs to move on. He needs to move on. Well, it looks like that the Bears are not going to use the franchise tag, and the deadline for teams to designate the franchise tag option on players is this Wednesday. And of course, we will cover it. But I do think the reason why that the Bears are probably moving on, I do think it's because of the young core of Chicago. Kevin White, he has proved to be unproven. He's been decimated with injuries. He looks like he might be a bust, but we can't really know if he's never been on the field that much. Cameron Meredith was pretty good last season, so maybe with the emergence of him, he can be good again. But I do think that the teams that should take a chance on him will be the Eagles, Rams, and Titans. And depending on what they do with the quarterback position, I do think the 49ers could take some interest as well. But that all depends on how they address this season in the quarterback position. Well, another free agent this season is Martellus Bennett. And I don't think New England is going to extend the tight end to a long-term deal. I don't see it. They tend not to overpay for players, and I do think Martellus Bennett's going to want more money. And he's not the only one that wants more money. It turns out that Rob Gronkowski wants Martellus Bennett to cash in as well. Gronkowski was at the Daytona 500 because, he is sponsored by Monster Energy. And, he told an ESPN NASCAR reporter, Bob Pockris, at the Daytona 500, this is what he told Martellus Bennett. He's all, I'm hoping that he breaks the bank. Whenever you see a tight end break the bank, it's good for the industry. It's good for the position. You want to see the position grow. So, I do agree with Gronkowski in a way that I do think he is going to break the bank. But does he really deserve to break the bank? I do think Bennett has a lot of talent as a tight end. I think if he can go to the right team, he can be one of the top tight ends in the league. And, Bennett and Gronkowski were supposed to be one of the most they're supposed to be one of the most deadliest 1-2 tight end combinations ever. Especially last season. Gronkowski had a lot of injuries. Bennett, Bennett, they weren't on the field at the same time. And it was just a shame that we never got to see this tandem work out. I do think that the fact that Bennett does want more money than his salary, which was a base salary of $5.085 million. He's going to want more than that. And I don't think the Patriots, they are not going to give it to him. They're just not. I think he is arguably the top free agent tight end in the market right now. But when I think a team that can break the bank for him, there's a lot of teams I think that, he's going to generate a lot of interest. And I do think teams that will take a chance on Martellus Bennett, I can see a variety of teams. I could probably see maybe the 49ers probably take a chance on him. Maybe the Arizona Cardinals. I can see the Rams. I could probably see. I don't see him going. Maybe he can go back to Chicago since Jay Cutler's not there. But actually, no, I don't see him going out to Chicago. He was pretty much a locker room nuisance there. So he's going to have interest. It just all depends on the market. But breaking the bank, I do agree that Martellus Bennett is going to break the bank. But does he deserve to break the bank? I don't know. I think a team is going to overpay for him, and they're going to be disappointed. Martellus Bennett I think he's a talented tight end, but I don't think he is the best tight end. I don't think he's by far not the best tight end. When I think of the best tight ends, Gronk is probably number one. Kelsey, number two. He can be number one by the end of this year. Greg Olsen, number three. And I put Martellus Bennett probably at 6 or maybe 7. I got to put Jimmy Graham at 4. But Martellus Bennett doesn't even crack the top 5 for me. He just doesn't. So I do think a team's going to really overspend on him. But there's nothing against him. He deserves the money. But I just think a team's going to overpay for him. So it'll be interesting to see the interests of Martellus Bennett. And of course, we will update you on that here at the GSMC Podcast Network. Well, I'm going to take my first break, and when I get back, I'm going to talk about a couple of running backs, Latavius Murrary and Adrian Peterson, and I'm going to tell you the news on those two gentlemen there. When we get back to Going to Meet Concepts Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Well, one of the valuable and productive players for the Oakland Raiders last season, Latavius Murrary, has been reportedly going to sign somewhere elsewhere. And, the Raiders, they had a great season. They returned to the playoffs for the first time since 2002. They had really great play from Derek Carr, who had an MVP season until we got hurt late in the year. They had Khalil Mack winning Defensive Player of the Year. So they had a great season. They got two franchise guys in Derek Carr and Khalil Mack, who are probably going to be one of the top players in their positions probably for the next decade or so. So the main focus for that team, the Raiders, the main focus for this team is to get extensions for Derek Carr and Khalil Mack. They are the top guys in this organization. They got guys that build around. There are two guys they build around. They can build a defense around Khalil Mack, build an offense around Derek Carr. Extending those guys is very important. But when you're going to extend those guys, there's going to be guys that you're not going to be able to sign. And one of those players on this team that may not be able to get a contract that he wants is Latavius Murrary. And Latavius Murray's been a very productive running back since he came to the league for the Raiders. I know in 2014, he played 15 games, but he played in more of a reserved role. He did have a couple of good games in his rookie year. He did finish with 424 yards, but 2015, he went over 1,000 yards and made the Pro Bowl. Yeah, so that was the beginning of the progress for the Oakland Raiders. And in this year, his rushing yards took a step back. He only had 788, but he had 12 touchdowns. And this team was scoring a lot, and Latavius Murray was a part of that. So I think with a lot of the depth at the running back position, the Oakland Raiders, I do think that's part of the reasons why Latavius Murrary doesn't want to be back. He wants to be the lead guy, but at times, I think, he looked, a little slow. He looks like he doesn't have that game-breaking skill set, in my opinion. I don't think he has that game-breaking skill set. He has great talent, but I just don't think he's someone that the Raiders want at the running back position right now. I do think they want to get better there, and I do think they will. So the Raiders, they have a couple guys at the running back position I think that can be really good next season. So with Latavius Murray potentially leaving, it leaves the door open for Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington. Both of them were really great in reserve roles last season. And I do think with those two guys, I do think they can be running back by committee. But I don't think any of those two guys are worthy of starters. I do think they're really good backs. They can be good complementary backs. But I don't know if they can take the role as being the true third down starter. So the Raiders could address the running back position in the draft. This is a deep draft. Or they can hit the free agency market. So with Latavius Murray potentially gone, can the Raiders get interest in Adrian Peterson? You got to think about it for a second. Well, the Raiders, can that be a possibility? I think it's possible. I really do. I do think it's possible because, the Raiders are a contending team. I do think Adrian Peterson can add something to this offense. I know he's 32 years old, but I did say that they have really good depth at the running back position. They got really good complementary backs there with Jalen Richard. They can keep Adrian Peterson fresh, and he will add such another dimension to this offense if he's fully healthy. I do think that Adrian Peterson to the Oakland Raiders could happen. I do think it could happen for the reasons I just said. The Raiders are a contender. The Raiders have depth at the running back position, and they can keep AP fresh with those guys. So I think it's something that hasn't been talked about, but I do think it can be a realistic possibility. I'm just surprised that the Raiders haven't been linked to Adrian Peterson because, if I had to choose between Latavius Murray and Adrian Peterson, I know Adrian Peterson is old. I know he's going to be 32. But I've seen enough of Latavius Murray. I have seen enough. He's just not the game-breaking starter I thought he would be. But I think right now with the talent in Oakland, and that is all the offensive talent, they have one of the best. They have one of the best offensive lines. They have the second best, in my opinion. I think with this team, the offensive talent that's there, I do think Adrian Peterson would be a good fit. So if I'm Reggie McKenzie and I had a choice between Latavius Murray and Adrian Peterson, and if I knew my team, if I knew the talent that I had, I'm going to take Adrian Peterson in a heartbeat. Because you got one of the best offensive lines in the league. You got a really great young quarterback who could be great again if he comes off injury really well. You got two good receivers there. You got Amari Cooper, who looks like he can be a star in this league. I think he will be a star if he's not already. You got Michael Crabtree, who's been a very productive receiver ever since he got there. And then you got two running backs behind you that can complement you whenever you need a breather. You got Jalen Richard and DeAndre Washington, and they can be good complementary backs. So if I'm Reggie McKenzie, I'm going to try to pursue Adrian Peterson. I do think he will be a great fit here, and I do think he can add a whole another dimension to this young team. And if they don't end up going with Peterson, I do think they will look to the draft. They're not going to get Leonard Fournette. They're just not going to. I don't think they're going to get Dalvin Cook. I do think they have a chance to get Dante Foreman, Christian McCaffrey, maybe Joe Mixon, despite his character issues there. But I do think the running back position is going to be one to watch for. And I know that Adrian Peterson is aging, but I do think this makes too much sense not to do. I really do like this. I think it makes way too much sense. So, if I'm Richard McKenzie, I'm going to do everything I can to bring Adrian Peterson to Oakland. I do think he can be a valuable piece for a Super Bowl run. Because I do think this team, the Raiders, I think they're a Super Bowl contender. And I know they had a taste of the playoffs. They got a really great core of guys, young guys, I might add. So I do think this can be the team that can challenge the Patriots, that can challenge the Steelers in the AFC. And I do think Adrian Peterson would be a huge part of that if they can get him. All right, well, that's I'm going to take my last break. And when I get back, I'm actually going to do a little Oscar recap when I get back to the Going to Me Concepts football podcast.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to Going to Me Concepts Football Podcast, and I'm going to actually kind of do a little Oscar recap real quick. The Oscars were last night. The biggest news from that was, the mix-up for Best Picture. And, where Warren Beatty, he announced that the winner was La La Land, which it really wasn't. He got the wrong envelope. He did say so, and then Moonlight ended up winning Best Picture. So that was pretty much the biggest story this morning. It was all over social media last night. So I had to talk about that a little bit. But, the reason why I want to talk about the Oscars is because the documentary by ESPN, OJ Made in America, won an Oscar for Best Documentary. And it is the longest film to win an Oscar. It's at, I believe, 467 minutes, beating out the 1969 foreign language film winner, which was called War and Peace. That was slated at 431 minutes. So it is the longest film to win an Oscar. And Ezra Edelman, I think that's how you say his name. Oh, I'm sorry, not Ezra Edelman and Caroline Waterlow, they accepted the award. Edelman did pay tribute to Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman in the speech. And I'm really, really glad that this film won. I'm really glad the Academy saw the greatness of the documentary. And, man, this documentary just has it all. It has it all. And this documentary is split into 5 parts. And if you haven't seen it, I do recommend it to watch it. It's really worth the watch. It's 7 hours and 47 minutes, but I do think if you watch it in a span of 3 to 4 days, I do think it's more enjoyable that way. But you can't really watch it straight through. It's kind of hard to sit through all that time. And, people, they got to do things outside of, their house. But I would recommend to watch it in like 3 to 5 parts, the way it was intended to be watched. And what I've seen in this film, it was just absolutely amazing the way it was displayed. Because, this documentary talked about O.J. Simpson, during his days at USC, during his days at Buffalo. And they talked about his celebrity, the way he just became, the way he rose to fame. He was someone that was famous in college. He was one of the top athletes in America at the time at USC. And, it chronicles, the play called The Run, which was against UCLA, which was regarded as one of the best college football plays of all time. And then it goes to O.J. Simpson being drafted by the Buffalo Bills at number 1, and his struggles from the first 2 to 3 seasons. And then all of a sudden there was a coaching change, and O.J. became one of the best running backs in the 70s. And I think he's a top 5 running back of all time. But the reason why we don't talk about O.J. Simpson as a football player is because all his legacy was tarnished by this, his murder trial. And watching this film, it was amazing how his celebrity, the film looked at race, it looked at the media, it looked at the criminal justice system all in one. It was just so brilliantly done. And, the film chronicles the race war between the LAPD and African Americans in South LA, and they talked about that because of the trial taking place in LA, and how race was kind of sort of played into the trial of O.J. Simpson before he was acquitted of the double murder of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman. So I do think that this was one of the few films I watched that was nominated for an Oscar. I'll be honest, I didn't get a chance to see Moonlight yet. I didn't get a chance to see La La Land. I did watch a couple of the films that were nominated this year, and this is one of the few ones. And I really do recommend, I love documentaries, and I love sports documentaries, so this was something that I was very interested in watching when it came out. But I do think if you're a sports fan, football fan, if you're into the criminal justice field, I do think if you're into watching a lot of documentaries about social issues, I think this is one of those documentaries that appeals to anyone. Because the O.J. Simpson trial was one of the most famous trials in recent history. O.J. Simpson and the white Ford Bronco just literally overtook the news cycle on the day it happened in 1994. It overtook the NBA Finals. It overtook Arnold Palmer's final day as a golfer. So I do recommend to watch this. I do think you don't have to be a sports fan. You don't have to be a football fan. I just think, if you're I just honestly think since it's one of the biggest trials, one of the biggest news stories in recent history, I do think people will be interested in it. I do think it's one of those documentaries that appeals to everyone. And before I go, this is actually the first Oscar for ESPN Films. And John Skipper, he did say that he was proud of the Academy Award winning as the latest accolade. And, he's he liked the way that 30 for 30 has grown. And when the 30 for 30 started, it was actually intended for the 30th anniversary, and evolved to a series that, that told compelling stories in sports, and this was one of them. So, I'm really glad that this film won, and I do recommend people to watch it. And I do think I really do think you don't have to watch it straight through. I would recommend it to watch it probably 3 to 5 days. Since I am doing a little Oscar recap, I did say that Moonlight did win Best Picture. I do want to point out, oh my God, I can't say his name. Mahershala Ali, he did win for Best Supporting Actor, and I was really glad about that. I loved him in House of Cards. I loved him in Luke Cage. I actually didn't get a chance to see Moonlight yet, so I don't know how he is on the film, but I think he was one of the most underrated actors. I'm really glad he won as well. All right, well, that's going to conclude my show today for the Going to Media Concepts Football Podcast. I will be back tomorrow. We'll discuss any type of news over the next 24 hours. As always, I'm Jeremiah. You guys have a good day, and thank you for tuning in to the Going to Media Concepts Football Podcast.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.